Righty. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for another Proof Power Hour. I'm very excited to keep the momentum going on these little kind of hour, a little bit over an hour events. And thanks for staying with us and participating. So we're here today to celebrate Asian Pacific American Heritage Month. May is such a beautiful time for us to celebrate the beauty and transformation of the AAPI community and the rich culture that is deeply rooted throughout our American history. Particularly today, I'm very honored to have a special guest from the Asian American and Pacific Islander community join us to share her personal journey of struggle, growth, and transformation. We'll be exploring the topic of anti-Asian racism, understanding and supporting the Asian experience. She's an award-winning reporter and TV anchor, former director of communications for the Office of the Mayor of Portland, and most currently the founder and filmmaker at Anecdotia Media, a video production agency that focuses exclusively on racial, social, and climate justice. So pretty important topics. So please help me welcome Eileen Park Robertson. We're very excited to have her join this Power Hour. Just a quick reminder, if you have questions, drop them in the question box in the Zoom chat, and we'll hopefully be able to answer them, as we go along. So, okay, without further ado, Eileen, I'm going to hand over to you. Please tell us more about yourself and your journey leading up to this important Heritage Month.
Thank you, Sandra. Well, hello, everybody. I want to thank Prue for inviting me to speak because these conversations are literally changing tech culture, corporate culture, and one by one, really, truly. So I'm honored that Prue is elevating the AAPI experience, the AAPI historical pain that we've been harboring, and having really impactful, meaningful conversations around this. So it really is an honor. A little bit about me. I was born in Flushing, New York. I was raised across the Hudson in Fort Lee. And after graduating high school, I went to undergrad at DePaul, Indiana, and then came back to New York for my first job at ABC News. And from there, it was honestly one of the most nonlinear career paths you could possibly imagine. I went and reported undercover in Myanmar, and then moved to Yakima, Washington as a local reporter, and then moved to South Korea for 2 years, and then Paris and Lebanon as a freelance journalist. And then I came back to the States as a weekend anchor and reporter in Green Bay, Wisconsin, and then Raleigh, North Carolina, and most recently in Portland, Oregon. And in Portland, I transitioned from news to politics and ran communications for the mayor of Portland, as Sandra mentioned. And the context is pretty significant because I was running communications in the era of Trump and nightly violent demonstrations. It was during this period that, because I was one of the most visible people in the city, that I became a bit of a lightning rod for people. And a lot of the attacks, the personal attacks that were coming my way, were racialized. So every single racist trope that you could possibly think of in regards to Asian women specifically was launched at me. Honestly, those are some of the darkest years of my life. And I know that hatred was catalyzed really by hatred of government and people who work for elected leaders. But it is a product of being dehumanized, really, and a variety of different layers of being dehumanized. One being dehumanized for being in government, another layer of being dehumanized for being Asian, and another layer of being dehumanized because I'm a woman. So all these different layers played a role in people having these preconceived notions of who I am and what I'm about. In the middle of all of this, my partner, who is now my husband, said, "This is crazy. He's had enough of seeing this abuse on me specifically over and over again." And my friends felt the same way. And I decided, after a couple of years of doing this, to take a sabbatical. So I left the city and I moved up to Vancouver with my now husband and just rested, painted, um, healed, just tried to get my mind out of that world, that highly charged political world. And then we got married. We eloped, and we didn't want anybody to know, because of my experience in the last couple of years being so visible in Portland. But also, I married someone who was in government for 14 years, and he was the longest serving mayor of Vancouver, British Columbia, BC, in Canada. So he also knows what it's like to be in the public eye. And so we didn't want anybody to find out. We just wanted to really enjoy our own private little bubble and stay in obscurity for as long as we could. But news started spreading very fast, and local reporters started picking up on it. So we knew we had to tell our story, and we didn't want to tell it. We didn't want the media to tell it for us. We wanted to tell it in our way. So ultimately, we chose Vogue, who gave us the platform and the freedom to say it in the narrative that we wanted to express, and how we met and all of that. The article came out 36 hours after the Atlanta spa shootings happened. And so I believe it was Tuesday when Atlanta happened, Tuesday night. I just broke down. And I broke because suddenly it was as if all these years of feeling invisible and our stories being suppressed, not recognized, were all those bottled up emotions just like unleashed, especially because right after Atlanta, if I don't know if anyone on this Zoom call knows, but there there was a wave of articles that started talking about the historical fetishization and hypersexualization of Asian women. And I'm talking very exclusively about the commodification of us and the exoticizing of us. I'm not talking about individual um, sexuality for personal expression. I'm not talking about that. That that's great. Power to anyone who wants to do that. I'm talking specifically about using fetishization as a tool for oppression to keep us in a place where we can't um, rise, we can't elevate, in whatever capacity that looks like. So, Atlanta happens. This is what I'm processing, and I started developing the language for my own experience, like what I experienced in Portland for those years. I started realizing the racialized context of that hatred towards me specifically. And then our news of our marriage broke. So that was happening all within 36, 72 hours that week. Yeah. And when that happened, there was a part of me that hoped and believed that at the height of Asian hate, um, with murders, literally murders hours ago, that there would be more awareness and understanding, but there wasn't. And my inbox, my husband's inbox, our DMs, all of our social accounts were flooded with Asian mistress, whore, yellow fever. The volume of it broke me. I felt that my silence is allowing people unleash their hate without accountability. So what I did was I just shared a few thoughts on video. I think it was about 10 minutes long, and I remember I was about to press post, and I'm like, this is the most vulnerable, this is the most raw and unfiltered, and I've ever been. And it's incredibly shame triggering too, because who wants to be talking about being fetishized? Like, that hurts your professional career when you are associated with that. And that's why so many women can't speak up on that, especially Asian women. Anyway, so I no longer feared protecting my reputation or um, or or having a characterization of me get blown up because I'm speaking so frankly. I no longer cared anymore. So I pressed post, and then everyone found out. And then it became this incredibly, um, strangely healing journey for me personally. The response that I received, especially from other Asian women, was so extraordinary. And it just, there was just a collective healing and weeping at the same time as a result of it, because they felt that, I was able to articulate things that they've also felt that they haven't been able to publicly share themselves. Anyway, so this has been a completely unexpected, extraordinary journey of advocacy, of healing, of this new territory where we're not going to be quiet about it anymore. And we are going to call people out for their racial bias or outright racism.
So Eileen, so first of all, I mean, we've spoken before, and it's still just, it's just an amazing story and an amazing journey that you've been on. And as you were talking now, it occurred to me that you've been in some incredibly difficult parts of the world,
Yeah.
covering news stories that were probably very dangerous. And yet you might be, in the last year, you might have entered into, you said it was one of your darkest periods and maybe one of the biggest
Mhm.
challenges. And so maybe that's if we have time later, we can maybe even dig into that as well, because it just occurs to me that, you know, you left the US to cover some really difficult stories. And it almost sounds like you felt or feel less safe during certain periods in the US than you
Yeah.
did covering stories. And that's a real, it's just a real difficult thing to contemplate.
Mm.
But we do have a couple questions, so I want to throw these out.
Mhm.
And right now, folks, feel free to pop in your questions. I don't have a lot of them, but I've got a couple that are both, I think, very interesting and meaty. So let me just shoot one out to you. This
Yeah.
one says, I recently began dating a Filipino man, and while sometimes I think I know enough to be able to help, sorry, I'm scrolling, to help combat the racism and microaggressions done towards him, sometimes I feel like I may be missing something. Would you be
Mm.
able to provide any insight or things you and your husband have come across that you can provide tips on? I'm sorry if this sounds strange. I don't think so. I just want to be the best support I can be as a white person. So, any
Oh,
thoughts on that?
yes. First of all, thank you for even having the awareness to know that there is a lot of sensitivity around this. And because of that, I find that most people don't want to bring it up. They're like, they're just there is a fear that they're going to be offensive or say the wrong thing. Don't fear that. Please ask, because if you keep assuming or just not saying anything at all, we can't change these attitudes or the sources of hate, really. The hurtful part about being an Asian American in America is always being the eternal foreigner. I I am not perceived by some people, not all, obviously. I'm not perceived as being a true American because I'm Asian. And so I can imagine his experience might be very similar. So anytime you hear friends or even within yourself, finding yourself othering him, making him seem like he doesn't belong here when he belongs here just as much as every other American in America, um, I'd say be conscious of that, uh, exacerbating his otherness. And that can look like anything from commenting on how he looks, the food his culture eats, um, and anything like that. Where or and just frame the language differently and encourage more inclusionary language, meaning like that is about as American as you can get on whatever topic that you're talking about. Just make him
Mm.
feel like he belongs. That'd be my suggestion. Considering that the
Thank
opposite
you.
has been happening for so long.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I think it's a tough, it's a tough situation because you want to um, show your interest in, different cultures without making it feel like you're, othering people. And I think that sometimes with all the best intentions,
Yeah.
that's kind of what happens, right? And maybe it's in the way that it's phrased or the way the topic comes up that we can be a little more careful about how we do that. So
Yeah, absolutely.
let's see. I have another question here.
Hmm.
A little bit of commentary at the front end. So for a very long time, racist remarks, jokes, etc., against Asians was very normalized, and as you just pointed out, not being recognized as an American and
Hmm.
considered acceptable. Before, racism against Asians was considered by a large group of individuals as not true racism, unfortunately, resulting into people quote unquote gatekeeping racism. With the recent increased level of awareness and more people recognizing this issue, do you think this is now true progress where hopefully future generations of Asian Americans won't have to face the issue that we've dealt with while growing up? And I don't know if there's a common understanding of what gatekeeping racism means, Eileen, and I don't know if that's something we need to also maybe explain.
Unpack. Yeah, that's, the, for example, Asians in tech are now frequently considered so white adjacent that we are no longer identified as people of color. And I think that kind of
Yeah.
speaks to what she's asking, because as if relative over representation of some East and Southeast Asians with socioeconomic and educational privilege means that the entire AAPI community is no longer subject to the issues of racism. It's
Got it.
this mix of privilege and at the same time exclusion, privilege and exclusion at the same time, that also gives us a unique position on which we can advocate for anti-racism and the dismantling of structural and systemic racism. And the origins of, especially, and colorism is an entire different thing, that it's this racist attitude within our community based on our skin color. But because of our light skin, we have long been perceived as white adjacent. And in addition to that, and what that means is, white adjacent basically means you're white. You're not a person of color. You're not a part of therefore you're not part of a marginalized community. Therefore, you don't know what racism is because you're also white. And as you know, that couldn't be further from the truth because of our exoticism, our otherism, our the natural oppression of immigration, of the poverty, the trauma of poverty. Like, all these factors play into the fact that we are also members of marginalized communities. And
Mhm.
so, I don't know if that answers the question, but that
So I
should help
think I think
illuminate why. Yeah.
it illuminates for sure. I think that first part. And what are your thoughts around whether we feel like there's, kind of true progress happening now, or is it just the beginning of kind of peeling the onion and finding out? Maybe I'll give my little snippet of my
Yeah.
observation has been in the last, year. I think many Americans have had to come to grips with racism in a way they hadn't before. And I'm not talking about Black Lives Matter, which is a whole nother, sad state, but as it applies to Asian Americans. And so I kind of wonder what your thoughts are. Are we making progress
Yeah.
or are we just starting?
Both. Both. The extraordinary thing about Black Lives Matter, in my opinion, was that our, civil rights leaders in the 60s and indigenous leaders really paved the way for us to speak, to have a platform as well. They really did. They did the hardest work. And I'm experiencing this as, as an Asian woman who is part of this collective movement that is only really happening in earnest, in mass, for us now. Like, we've had our own civil rights movement after the death of Vincent Chin, and in Berkeley there was an incredible um, sectional solidarity movement within the Black, Indigenous, Latinx groups. However, it was in isolation. It wasn't like a mass movement across the country, across the world, like we're seeing now. And the reason, in my opinion, that we are having this now, we are having the momentum now, is because of the Black leaders have paved the way for these civil rights movements to happen. And so this, when you look at the Stop Asian Hate rallies all over the country, notice that it's not just Asian people there. It's the solidarity between BIPOC communities is extraordinary. And that is the only reason why we have the prominence and the momentum that we do now, because it's not just us leading the charge, it's the collective. So I
Right.
do see tremendous change happening that's unprecedented, and it gives me a lot of hope.
That's terrific. That's great to hear. And maybe it kind of speaks to this whole point of, remaining silent, and how the community has often been told, don't
Mhm.
complain, don't, put your head down, work hard,
Right.
and how that has been detrimental in many ways. And maybe that's changing. Maybe that's one of the big changes afoot. I don't know what your thoughts are on that.
Yeah, there is, especially amongst the immigrant community, this belief that you should turn the other cheek. You should keep silent in fear of either being exposed for your uh, undocumented status, A, or as new immigrants, even those who are documented as new immigrants, if you challenge a system that you enter, what what are the repercussions of that? So we don't, so many of us don't even have the option to challenge a system, to speak out. And so generations of that enforce this belief that if you do speak out, you will be targeted, and you will. But my parents and my parents' parents, all of their work has allowed for me to have this space now where I can speak without um, without as much fear.
That's a great way to
I
put
think
that.
that's
And
I think
maybe
that's changing, that mentality that you can't speak
yeah,
anymore. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I think folks are at that point where it's no longer okay, and
Hmm.
they're taking control of that, which I think is amazing and, timely.
Yeah.
Um, so I think one of the challenges we often face, whether it's at work or at home or out in the social world, is just the issues of bias. And
Yeah.
we've talked about this a few times in our power hours of, subconscious or conscious, biases, and how to kind of, root those out or identify that you might have a bias, and whether that's something you want to address or just acknowledge. I don't know if you can talk about that a bit.
Yeah. Well, there might be many who say, well, I'm not racist. I don't hate Asian people. And here's the thing, there's overt racism and there's covert racism. And the most painful racism, at least for me, are the everyday microaggressions, the thousands and thousands of discriminatory slights that we experience in a lifetime that continues to keep us in oppression. And those slights are rooted really in otherism, in being perceived as something foreign or exotic. It's the collective trauma of being made fun of by your classmates when they say you smell like kimchi when you don't, and it's kids who stretch their
Mm,
eyelids to make it look smaller. It's the racially motivated rumors and gossip spread about professional Asian women, about who they must have slept with in the company to get to where they are, and that's real. And I'm specifically bringing that up here because every corporate structure that I've been in, the the role gossip plays in oppressing Asian women is profound, because we are constantly put in this category of being um, um, of not not taken seriously or not credible leaders in a company because of all of those racist tropes attached to us. And that, I spoke about how a lot of the attacks that I got in Portland were racialized. I didn't speak yet about the internal attacks that I got at leading comms for a city of 10,000 employees, and what that meant for for the for the um, BIPOC community to have a minority leading, to be in such a position like that, and to break glass ceilings, and then to be attacked relentlessly for it and discriminated against for it, etc. Um, so that is very real. And I would say, tackling anytime you make an Asian woman feel like they didn't deserve to be where they are because of, being considered a mistress or being fetishized or being hypersexualized, then you're contributing to the problem. And I'm going to be honest with you, like, this is a pervasive mentality, and it's not spoken. Like, people won't acknowledge that, but they have it. And you do that by spreading gossip or engaging in gossip, or it's really subtle, but it happens, and happens over and over again. So examine that bias. Like, when that comes up, and when you see an Asian colleague, and immediately you start going down that path, now you know why you have that discrimination against Asian women. You know where that comes from now.
What about biases that are maybe other stereotypes, like, hardworking, but, kind of stay behind the scenes, don't take center stage. And that kind of leads to that same question around, is there an Asian American glass ceiling? Is it a different ceiling? And is it, are there different, kind of those rules of progression? Because I sense that there's some of that, maybe even more subtle, and maybe more so, of kind of, just put your head down, and you're a great hard worker, and then, you get passed over. Any comments on that?
Yeah, totally. I can't put all of this on external racism, because that I believe that mentality comes from, honestly, our parents, who have asked who don't encourage us to be too prominent, in the sense of being so visible. Or here's what I mean by that. I can speak to my personal Korean American experience. I can't, I don't want to generalize or make assumptions, but in the Korean culture, in my family's Korean culture specifically, there was this, I was discouraged from being too outspoken about anything. I was discouraged um, from pursuing other creative job opportunities in fear of. This all stems from, it's just an immigrant mentality, right? You don't draw attention to yourself, do the best you can, keep a low profile, and you'll be fine, and
Mhm.
no one will bother you. And that is so deeply ingrained in so many of us. Like, and you'll be fine so long as you keep quiet. Just keep as quiet as you can, be under the just a little under the radar, and you'll be fine. And they were so well-meaning. I know the heart and the root of that, but I completely disagree with that. And if I ever were to have children, which I don't plan on having children, but if I ever were to have children, I'd raise them to be disruptors and loud and obnoxious and take up space and just start rattling people and making them feel uncomfortable.
That's awesome, and great advice. Okay, so I have a comment from one of our folks. So Eileen, thank you for sharing your incredible story and the work you're doing to bring awareness to the Asian American experience. As an Asian American woman, this hits incredibly close to home for me. At the same time, as a mother of young kids and a hardworking professional, I also have extreme guilt for not making time to be more vocal about this topic, which is a different
Mm.
topic in itself.
Right,
So I
right.
see you as a hero. I
Oh,
love this. I see you as a hero for myself and for all Asians in America for leading the charge here. Thank you, all in caps. I don't, it's not a question, but I don't know if you want to comment on that as well.
yeah, oh my gosh, Sandra and everyone watching this, like when I first came out a month and a half ago and shared like, uncomfortable subjects of being fetishized and hypersexualized and the racialized misogyny, basically, th- that was pervasive in the couple of years that I was especially in Portland. The response from Asian women in particular, just it I like I wept. I wept when I read their messages to me because every single one of them, there was, and I received about a couple hundred of them, but every single one of them said something to the extent of, and I can never say this, and I can never
Mm.
bring this up in my company or in my circle of friends. So thank you for saying these uncomfortable things for us because we can never bring it up. And and the reality is they can't. It could be because if they were to suddenly speak it within their company about being discriminated against for all the reasons that I just said, it puts them in a very vulnerable position. And so many people, most people, don't have the luxury of being able to just leave a job or putting their position in jeopardy or a promotion in jeopardy as a result. They don't. Most people don't have that luxury, and I'm in a position for the first time in my life where I can do that. I have my own company.
Yep.
I can raise hell for them, essentially.
It's terrific. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So I have a question on that. It's a great segue. I would love to hear more, and I think the group would love to hear more about Anecdotia and what your focus
Mm.
has been there. That would be very, very interesting. And at the same time, I want to let folks know make sure you pop in if you've got questions, either through chat or the link that Tyler provided.
Yeah. Right as I started at the mayor's office in Portland 2018, I also started my video production company, Anecdotia, which basically means anecdote utopia. And I did that because after about a decade in news, I, I'm trying to frame this conversation so I don't make it very political. So I'll try to be as apolitical as possible. But I was very disheartened with the change in power in America, and be and it changed. It fundamentally changed news. 2016, that election fundamentally changed everything about journalism, and I found myself being a part of, and I still love the fourth estate. I'm not saying that journalism is on the decline. I think it's evolving and morphing, and that's a good thing. But there is a part of journalism, especially in my field in TV journalism, that really encouraged the sensationalizing of things, and being part of creating this clash. It really it, the model it survives on our clicks. So how do you draw people's attention to what you're reporting on? By making it the most extreme all the time, this group battling this group, or you know you you probably all know what I'm talking about. Anyway,
Yeah.
so I just got tired of being an agent of generating fear in communities. I no longer wanted to be a part of this. The storytelling that I used to do wasn't accepted in pitch meetings anymore. And so, and that all changed in 2016. So after a couple of years of that, I'm like, I can't do this anymore. I need to tell my own stories. I want to tell stories on climate, racial, and social justice, and that's it. Those are the only stories that I care about. Those are the only stories I want to push out, and I want to be a part of the healing of the community, not the corrosive decline of humanity. And so, yeah, so Anecdotia was born. And ever since then, my clients, they're ranged from all over like the nonprofits to big Fortune 500 companies who want to tell stories about the Black experience or the Indigenous experience, especially, or conversations on abolition, which I find fascinating. And basically, it's saying we shouldn't have a criminal system. There shouldn't be anything. There shouldn't be prisons, period. So things like that, just really pushing the
Wow.
boundaries of what people are comfortable with, is what I love, and that's what I do with Anecdotia.
You know, this has been, I think, just a really great opportunity for us, to learn from you, to hear your story. And it's interesting on so many different levels. Just your whole experience as an Asian American, as a woman, as a professional that has gone through some significant, kind of, I think, changes in your career. So I just
Mm,
feel like there's just so much that we could just have a lot more time to dig into. It just be a lot of fun. So we may have to talk you into coming back for maybe a roundtable, excuse me, a
yeah, I'm
roundtable
happy
discussion,
to.
because I know that I have definitely appreciated the time. I'm just doing a quick round here to make sure I don't have any questions that I didn't ask. And I think we'll be, getting ready to wrap up. And, before we part ways, a few things I want to say. So I know it's been a challenging year for all of us during this pandemic, but especially for our AAPI community.
Mhm.
They've endured a range of emotions and challenges that have quite frankly been made even more difficult with this surge currently affecting our colleagues, friends, and family in India right now. And Eileen, we didn't have a chance to talk about that, but we have
Yeah,
employees in India that we're, kind of holding our breaths and hoping that,
yeah,
everybody comes through okay. They've already suffered some losses, and in their families, not our employees directly, but our hearts are with them right now, and just
yeah,
holding our breath. But I want to let all of our folks know in this AAPI community that Proof stands with you, whether it's
mm,
helping to get through the pandemic, but combating the xenophobia and this fight for unity. So we're with you, Eileen, as well. And now that you've
mm,
spent some time with us, we hope to stay connected and continue to learn from you.
yeah,
Um, I want to thank everyone for coming together today. I know how busy folks are, and I really appreciate everyone giving up a little bit of their no meeting zone. Eileen, we have this thing called no meeting zones where we try not to schedule meetings during this window. So
yeah,
from time to time, we pop a power hour in. Um, anyway, this gives us a chance to learn and support and help embrace the community. But it's not just about anti-Asian hate. It's about anti-ignorance of our differences and accepting
yeah,
what makes us different, embracing it. For me, it's beyond acceptance. It's really about embracing it, because that's what's going to make us stronger and much more powerful.
mm,
So I want to encourage our Proof team to continue to submit suggestions for any other topics. We've touched a lot on kind of diversity related topics, but that's not the whole purpose of the Prove Hours. They can be innovation, they can be entrepreneurship, it can be a lot of different things. I feel like we've kind of been in catch up mode trying to do some things that we hadn't been able to do last year. So it's been great to do that, but it's not the only reason for the power hours. Um, and yeah, so I just want to encourage everybody to continue to send in your ideas. But other than that, Eileen, I want to thank you very much once again for your time and for sharing your story. And I'm so glad that you've made this decision to go out and tell your story, and to be loud and disruptive and obnoxious and do whatever it takes, because that's what it's going to take. So thank
yeah.
you. Thank you very much.